I found out my HOA president's husband had backed over my fence for the 7th time when I came home from work on a Tuesday evening in late March to find fresh tire tracks through what used to be the white picket barrier separating my property from the cul-de-sac turnaround. The wooden posts were snapped like toothpicks, scattered across my front lawn like some kind of suburban massacre. I stood there in my driveway in Gilbert, Arizona, my toolbox still in hand, and felt something inside me finally snap, just like those fence posts. My name is Aaron O'Connor, and I had moved into this Sycamore Heights subdivision about 14 months ago. It was supposed to be my fresh start after the divorce, a nice 3-bedroom ranch with a decent yard and reasonable HOA fees. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first, tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, the kind of place where kids could still ride bikes without parents having heart attacks. But I hadn't counted on Brenda Patterson, the HOA president, and her husband Greg becoming the bane of my entire existence. The first time Greg backed over my fence was in January, just 2 months after I had moved in. He had been visiting someone on my street, got turned around in the cul-de-sac, and just plowed right through the section of fence near the mailbox. He apologized profusely, said his depth perception was off, promised to pay for repairs. I figured accidents happen, shook his hand and called a handyman. Cost me $300, which Greg reimbursed through Venmo within a week. I thought that was the end of it. The second time was in February. Same spot, same excuse about the tight turn radius in the cul-de-sac. By then I had learned that Greg was married to Brenda, who had a reputation in the neighborhood for being, well, difficult. People whispered about her threatening legal action over garbage cans left out past noon, sending violation notices for dandelions, measuring lawn heights with an actual ruler. But I kept my head down, fixed my fence again for another $250, and Greg once more apologized with what seemed like genuine embarrassment. The third time happened 3 weeks later. I started to suspect this was not accidental. Greg claimed his truck had a blind spot issue. I pointed out that 3 times hitting the exact same fence in the exact same spot seemed statistically improbable. He got defensive, accused me of placing my fence too close to the turnaround, which was ridiculous because my property survey clearly showed I was well within my boundaries. Brenda showed up that evening with a copy of the HOA bylaws, trying to argue that decorative fencing needed to be set back an additional 3 feet from the street. I showed her my survey, my permits, and the original neighborhood plat map. She left in a huff, but Greg did pay for that repair too. Times 4 and 5 happened in quick succession in early March, within a week of each other. I was spending more money on fence repairs than I was on groceries. Greg stopped apologizing. Brenda started sending me violation notices about my grass being a 1/4 inch too high, my recycling bin being the wrong shade of blue, my house numbers needing to be repainted because they were supposedly faded. It became clear this was harassment, but I could not figure out why. I had never done anything to this woman or her husband. I kept to myself, paid my dues on time, maintained my property immaculately just to avoid giving them ammunition. The 6th time I installed a camera. A proper Ring doorbell aimed right at the fence line, plus a second camera mounted under my eave with a perfect view of the cul-de-sac. I caught Greg on video that time, and it was not an accident. He pulled into the turnaround, looked directly at my fence, put his massive Ford F-350 in reverse, and deliberately backed into it. The video was crystal clear, time-stamped, undeniable evidence. I saved it to 3 different devices and uploaded it to cloud storage. I confronted Brenda at the next HOA meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse near the neighborhood pool. About 40 homeowners attended, most of them there to complain about various things. When public comment opened, I stood up with my laptop and asked to show evidence of harassment. Brenda's face went red immediately. She tried to rule me out of order, but enough other homeowners demanded to see what I had that she could not refuse without looking even more tyrannical. I played the video. The room went silent as everyone watched Greg deliberately destroy my fence. There were gasps, some angry muttering, and one guy in the back actually said, "What the hell?" out loud. I explained that this was the 6th time, detailed all the previous incidents, and showed my receipts for repairs totaling over $1,400. I demanded reimbursement and a guarantee that it would stop. Brenda went on the offensive. She claimed I was defaming her husband, that the video was somehow manipulated, that I was violating HOA rules by installing cameras without architectural approval. Someone pointed out that doorbell cameras were explicitly allowed under state law and that nothing in our CCRs prohibited security devices. Another homeowner, a lawyer named Sandra who lived 3 streets over, stood up and said what I was showing looked like criminal mischief and possibly harassment, and that the HOA president using her position to retaliate against a homeowner was a serious liability issue. The meeting devolved into chaos. Brenda refused to address the issue, tried to move on to other business, and ultimately adjourned the meeting early when people would not stop demanding answers. I went home that night feeling vindicated but also knowing I had just made things exponentially worse. The seventh time happened the very next day, which was a Thursday. I was actually home when it happened, heard the crunch of wood from inside my house. I ran outside to find Greg backing away from my destroyed fence, and he had the audacity to wave at me like we were friends. I yelled at him to stop, that I had it all on camera again, that I was calling the police. He rolled down his window and told me that if I did not like it, I should move. Then he drove off, leaving my fence in pieces. I did call the police. A young officer named Ramirez showed up about 20 minutes later, took my statement, watched the videos from all 7 incidents. He looked uncomfortable, admitted this was clearly criminal mischief, but said that since it was ongoing neighbor dispute stuff, I would probably need to go through the court system for a restraining order or file charges directly with the prosecutor's office. He did write up a report, gave me the case number, and suggested I document everything meticulously. He also told me off the record that he had heard of Brenda Patterson and that she had a reputation with the Gilbert PD for making frivolous complaints. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had tried being reasonable. I had tried following proper channels. I had tried public accountability. Nothing worked. Brenda and Greg seemed to think they could do whatever they wanted because she had a little bit of power in the HOA. The injustice of it burned in my gut. I was a law-abiding citizen, paid my taxes, worked hard as an HVAC technician, and just wanted to live in peace. Why was that too much to ask? The next morning, Friday, I called my buddy Derek, who owned a metal fabrication shop over in Mesa. Derek and I had served together in the Army, kept in touch over the years, and I knew he could help me with what I had in mind. I drove over during my lunch break with measurements and a very specific request. "So let me get this straight," Derek said, wiping grease off his hands with a red shop rag. "This guy has backed over your fence 7 times, and you want to install something that will stop him the 8th time?" "Exactly," I said, "but I do not want to put up some obvious concrete barrier. I want it to look exactly like my fence but reinforced so that when he tries it again, his truck is the one that gets damaged, not my property." Derek grinned, the kind of smile that suggested he appreciated a good plan for justified comeuppance. "I can do that. Steel posts set in concrete footings 2 feet deep. Horizontal steel rails between them, thick gauge steel plate backing. We will paint it white, attach the pickets to the steel frame so it looks identical to your old fence. It will look like wood, but it will stop a truck cold. How much? For you?" "Cost of materials plus a case of beer. This jerk has it coming." We shook on it. Derek said he could have everything ready by Monday, could install it on Tuesday if I took the day off work. I agreed immediately. I spent the weekend cleaning up the wreckage of my fence for the 7th time, piling the broken wood in my backyard, making sure the property line was completely clear. I also called a lawyer, spent $200 for a consultation about my options. She confirmed that I was within my rights to install a fence on my property line, that using steel reinforcement was not illegal, and that if someone damaged their vehicle by hitting my properly placed fence, that was their problem, not mine. She also suggested I keep recording, keep documenting, and be prepared to file a civil suit for damages and harassment. Monday evening, Derek called to say everything was ready. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work, which I almost never did. And Derek showed up at 7 a.m. with his truck bed full of materials and his apprentice, a kid named Marcus who looked like he could bench press a car. They worked fast, digging the post holes with an auger, mixing concrete, setting the steel posts with precision. By noon, the horizontal rails were in place, and by 3 p.m., they were attaching the white painted pickets to the steel frame. The fence looked absolutely identical to the one that had been there before, just slightly newer and cleaner. You would never know that behind those innocent-looking white pickets was enough steel to stop a tank. "You are sure the concrete is set enough?" I asked as they packed up their tools. "It will be fully cured in 48 hours, but honestly, it is solid enough right now to do what you needed to do," Derek said. "That truck hits this, he is going to have a very bad day." I paid Derek for the materials, handed him a case of his favorite IPA, and thanked both him and Marcus profusely. After they left, I stood in my front yard admiring the fence. It looked perfect, innocent, like any normal decorative barrier. I checked both cameras to make sure they had clear views of the fence and the turnaround. Everything was ready. I did not have to wait long. Wednesday afternoon, I was actually at work, up on a roof replacing an air conditioning condenser unit at a house in Chandler, when my phone buzzed with an alert from my doorbell camera. Motion detected. I checked the live feed and felt my pulse quicken. Greg's F-350 was pulling into the cul-de-sac turnaround. He made a show of swinging wide, then lined up his truck, and I watched through my phone screen as he put it in reverse and accelerated hard toward my fence. The sound, even through my phone's tinny speaker, was spectacular. A massive metallic crunch, the screech of tearing metal, the crack of something important breaking. Greg's truck jolted to a complete stop like it had hit a brick wall. My fence did not even budge. The pickets did not even crack. The truck, however, was another story. I could see the rear bumper crumpled, the tailgate bent inward, one of the taillights hanging by its wiring. Fluid, probably transmission fluid or oil, began pooling on the pavement. Greg got out of his truck, and even through the camera I could see the shock and confusion on his face. He walked around to the back, stared at the damage, then looked at my fence like it had personally betrayed him. He actually reached out and pushed one of the pickets, and I could see the moment he realized this was not wood. He kicked the fence, immediately regretted it based on how he hobbled back, and then got on his phone. I saved the video immediately, watched it 3 more times, and felt satisfaction wash over me like a cool drink on a hot day. The homeowner whose AC I was fixing noticed me grinning at my phone and asked if I had won the lottery. I told her something like that. By the time I got home at 5:30, there was quite a scene in my cul-de-sac. Greg's truck was still there, now up on a flatbed tow truck. Greg himself was standing on my driveway with Brenda, both of them looking furious. Brenda saw me pull up and immediately marched over, her face the color of a ripe tomato. "What did you do to your fence?" she demanded before I even got out of my truck. "I replaced it," I said calmly, shouldering my work bag. "Again, for the 7th time. Because your husband keeps running it over. You installed some kind of trap. Look what you did to Greg's truck." I looked. The damage was extensive, several $1,000s worth at least. The rear axle looked bent, the bumper was destroyed, the tailgate would need to be replaced entirely, and there was definitely mechanical damage based on all the fluid that had leaked. "I installed a fence," I said, "on my property, within my property lines. That is not a trap, that is a boundary marker. If your husband had not deliberately backed into it for an 8th time, his truck would be fine. You reinforced it with steel. You knew he would hit it." "I reinforced my fence, which I have every right to do. Because your husband has destroyed it 7 previous times, I got tired of spending money on repairs." "Would you like to see the video of him deliberately ramming my fence this time? Or the videos from the previous 7 times? Greg walked over then, limping slightly from his fence-kicking incident. "You are going to pay for my truck repairs, buddy." I actually laughed. I could not help it. "No, I am not. You are going to pay me back for all 7 previous fence repairs, plus the cost of this reinforced fence. Plus damages for harassment. I have every incident documented. I have video evidence. I filed a police report, and I have already spoken to a lawyer." Brenda pulled out her phone. "We will see what the police have to say about your booby trap." "Please call them," I said. "I would love to file another report about your husband's criminal mischief." She did call. Officer Ramirez showed up again about 40 minutes later, this time with a partner, an older cop named Jenkins. I invited them both to come inside, showed them my computer with all the saved videos, walked them through all 8 incidents. Ramirez nodded along, clearly remembering our previous conversation. Jenkins watched the videos with his arms crossed, his expression growing darker with each playback. "So let me make sure I understand," Jenkins said. "Mr. Patterson has deliberately backed into your fence 8 times, the first 7 times destroying a standard wooden fence. And this 8th time he did the same thing, but your fence had been reinforced." "That is correct," I said. "I reinforced it because I was tired of paying for repairs when I had done nothing wrong." "And your fence is on your property line, properly permitted?" I showed him the survey, the original permits, the property plat. Everything was in perfect order. Jenkins looked at Ramirez. "This is pretty clear-cut criminal mischief, ongoing pattern, evidence of intent. And he hit a legally installed fence on private property. That is on him." They went back outside. I followed, watching from my porch as Jenkins spoke with Greg and Brenda. I could not hear everything, but I caught phrases like multiple incidents, video evidence, and press charges. Brenda's voice kept rising, insisting I had created a hazard, that I had trapped her husband, that this was targeted harassment against them. Jenkins just shook his head and handed Greg a citation. Brenda absolutely lost it. She started yelling about how she was the HOA president, how she would have my house seized for violations, how she would make my life hell. Jenkins told her very calmly to step back and lower her voice or she would be cited for disorderly conduct. She did not lower her voice. She got louder, started jabbing her finger toward my house, saying I was a troublemaker who had been violating HOA rules since I moved in, that I was a liar, that I had somehow faked all the videos. "Madam, I need you to calm down right now," Jenkins said, his tone shifting to something more authoritative. "Do not tell me to calm down. I am the president of this HOA, and this man has been—" "I do not care if you are the president of the United States," Jenkins interrupted. "You need to step back and control yourself." Greg tried to pull Brenda back, but she shook him off. She turned back to Jenkins, and I could see she was about to say something else when another neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 houses down, came walking up. "Officer, I saw the whole thing," Mrs. Chen said in her precise accented English. "The truck backed into the fence on purpose. I have seen it happen before too. That man," she pointed at Greg, He has been bullying Aaron for months. 2 more neighbors emerged then, both confirming they had witnessed various incidents, both offering to provide statements. Brenda looked around wildly, clearly not expecting the neighborhood to turn against her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then started yelling again about how everyone was conspiring against her, how she had the authority to fine all of us. That was when Jenkins had apparently had enough. "Mrs. Patterson, I am asking you one more time to calm down and stop yelling. You cannot tell me what to do. I know my rights. I am going to call your supervisor and have your badge." Jenkins sighed, pulled out his handcuffs, and told Brenda she was being detained for disorderly conduct. She tried to pull away, which escalated the situation rapidly. Ramirez moved in to assist, and within about 30 seconds, Brenda was in handcuffs, still screaming about violations and authority and lawsuits. They put her in the back of the patrol car, read her rights, and the entire cul-de-sac had come out to watch the spectacle. Greg stood there looking shell-shocked. Jenkins turned to him, asked if he had anything else to say. Greg just shook his head, said he would deal with his truck, and walked off toward the tow truck driver. Jenkins handed me a copy of the citation issued to Greg for criminal mischief, told me I could file additional charges through the prosecutor if I wanted, and suggested I get a restraining order. Then they drove off with Brenda still yelling from the back seat. The rest of the week was surreal. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. My doorbell rang constantly with neighbors stopping by to offer support, share their own horror stories about Brenda's HOA tyranny, and thank me for standing up to her. I learned that Brenda had been HOA president for 6 years, had driven out 2 previous board members who disagreed with her, and had threatened legal action against at least a dozen homeowners for trivial violations. People were afraid of her, afraid of the fines and the legal fees and the hassle. Brenda made bail that same night. Thursday morning I found a notice on my door demanding I remove my fence within 24 hours or face daily fines of $100. The notice cited a non-existent bylaw and was signed by Brenda in her capacity as HOA president. I scanned it, emailed it to my lawyer, and went to work. My lawyer, Patricia Hammond, called me during lunch. "This is harassment and abuse of authority. I am going to file for an emergency restraining order against both Brenda and Greg Patterson, and I am also going to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA board." "Do you know who the other board members are?" I did not, but a neighbor named Robert who had stopped by the previous evening had given me contact information for the other 2 board members, a retired teacher named Judith and a software engineer named Alan. I gave Patricia their information, and she said she would handle it. Friday I got a call from Alan, the software engineer. He sounded stressed. "Aaron, this is Alan Chen, HOA board member. I need to apologize on behalf of the board. Judith and I had no idea what Brenda was doing. We have been mostly hands-off because she insisted she could handle everything. After what happened this week, we have been contacted by about 30 homeowners with complaints. We are calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow Saturday at 10 a.m. at the clubhouse. Can you attend?" I said I could. Saturday morning I showed up to find the clubhouse packed. Every seat was taken, people were standing along the walls, and the energy in the room was electric. Brenda sat at the front table with Alan and Judith, her arms crossed, her expression venomous. Greg was not there, presumably dealing with his truck repairs. Alan called the meeting to order, and the room erupted. One by one, homeowners stood up and recounted instances of Brenda's abuse of power. Frivolous fines, threats of legal action, selective enforcement of rules, personal vendettas. Sandra, the lawyer from the previous meeting, presented a formal motion to remove Brenda from the board for misconduct. The motion required a majority vote of homeowners present. Brenda tried to argue, tried to defend herself, but the room was having none of it. Someone brought up the 8 fence incidents, the video evidence, her arrest. Someone else mentioned that using HOA authority for personal harassment opened the HOA up to massive legal liability. Judith, the retired teacher, looked genuinely distressed and said she had no idea things had gotten so bad. The vote was called. Out of the 73 homeowners present, 68 voted to remove Brenda from the board. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly, and announced that we were all going to regret this, that she would sue every single one of us. Sandra stood up and very calmly informed Brenda that any further threats would be documented and used as evidence in the legal proceedings already underway. Brenda grabbed her papers and stormed out. The meeting continued for another hour. Alan and Judith apologized repeatedly, promised to review all of Brenda's actions over the past 6 years, and committed to refunding any fines that had been improperly assessed. A new election for the vacant board position was scheduled for 3 weeks later. By the time I left, I felt like a weight had been lifted off the entire neighborhood. Monday morning, Patricia called me. The restraining order had been approved. Both Brenda and Greg Patterson were prohibited from coming within 100 yards of my property, from contacting me directly or indirectly, and from taking any HOA actions related to me. Violation would result in immediate arrest. Patricia had also filed a civil suit against them for damages, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking reimbursement for all fence repairs, my legal fees, and punitive damages. Greg's insurance company called me that afternoon. They had reviewed the claim for his truck damage, watched the videos, and determined that the damage was the result of the driver's intentional actions and therefore not covered. Greg would have to pay out of pocket for repairs. The adjuster, a woman named Kelly, sounded amused when she told me this. She also mentioned that based on the video evidence, their company would not be contesting any claims I made against Greg. Tuesday, I got a certified letter from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. They had reviewed the police reports and video evidence and were moving forward with criminal charges against Greg Patterson for 8 counts of criminal mischief. I would need to be available to testify if the case went to trial. I called the prosecutor assigned to the case, a young woman named Lisa Ramirez, interestingly with the same last name as the officer. She told me that with the video evidence, Greg would almost certainly take a plea deal, but if he did not, the case was solid. Things quieted down for a few weeks. My fence stood perfect and undamaged. I saw neither Brenda nor Greg, which was a relief. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though there was a definite change in atmosphere. People were friendlier, more willing to chat, less worried about minor violations. The new HOA board under Alan and Judith was reasonable, responsive, and actually focused on community improvement rather than petty enforcement. 3 weeks later, the HOA held elections for the vacant board position. 6 people ran, and a retired Marine named Thomas won by a comfortable margin. He had a no-nonsense approach and promised transparent governance. His first act was to propose revising the CCRs to prevent any single board member from having too much unilateral authority. In early May, I got a call from Lisa Ramirez at the county attorney's office. "Mr. O'Connor, I wanted to let you know that Greg Patterson accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to 8 counts of criminal mischief, has been ordered to pay full restitution to you for all damages including your reinforced fence and legal fees. And he is on probation for 2 years. Any further incidents and he goes to jail."
I asked about Brenda.
Lisa said that because Brenda had not personally damaged my property, criminal charges against her specifically were limited to the disorderly conduct from her arrest, which was a misdemeanor. However, my civil suit was still ongoing, and Lisa had heard from colleagues that the case was very strong. In mid-May, Patricia called with an update on the civil case. "The Pattersons' lawyer has reached out about a settlement. They are offering full reimbursement for all fence repairs, your reinforced fence installation, all legal fees to date, and $25,000 in additional damages. In exchange, they want a mutual non-disparagement agreement and for you to drop the emotional distress claims." I thought about it. $25,000 plus full reimbursement would put me well ahead financially. And honestly, I just wanted the whole situation to be over. I told Patricia to counter at $35,000. No non-disparagement clause because I had not disparaged anyone, just told the truth, and I would drop the emotional distress claims if they agreed to those terms. 2 days later, Patricia called back. They accepted. $35,000, full reimbursement, no non-disparagement clause. They just want this over. We finalized the settlement in late May. I received a check for $43,000 total, which covered all my expenses plus the settlement amount. Greg's probation meant he had to make restitution payments through the court system, and Patricia had ensured those were front-loaded, so I got paid quickly. Brenda never apologized, never acknowledged any wrongdoing, but she and Greg listed their house for sale 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that they were moving to Scottsdale, trying to start fresh somewhere else. Part of me felt sorry for Greg, who seemed like he had been pulled into Brenda's vendetta, but mostly I just felt relieved. They closed on their house in mid-June and were gone by the end of the month. The new HOA board turned out to be excellent. Alan, Judith, and Thomas ran things with transparency and common sense. They held regular meetings, actually listened to homeowner concerns, and focused on real issues like street repairs and community events rather than measuring grass height. The neighborhood thrived. Property values went up. People actually enjoyed living there again. My reinforced fence became something of a legend in Sycamore Heights. New neighbors would ask about it, and the story would get retold, usually with embellishments. Some versions had Greg's truck flipping over, which definitely did not happen, but I did not bother correcting people. It was a good story and it had a good ending. I used some of the settlement money to upgrade my house, new appliances, a renovated bathroom, a proper workshop in the garage. I also took a vacation, my first real one in years. Spent a week in Sedona hiking and not thinking about fences or HOAs or crazy neighbors. It was glorious. When I got back, Mrs. Chen invited me over for dinner, her way of thanking me for standing up to Brenda. Over homemade dumplings and tea, She told me that Brenda had tried to fine her 3 years ago for having too many flowers in her front yard, claiming they violated some aesthetic guideline. Mrs. Chen had paid the fine rather than fight it, $200, and had resented it ever since. She was thrilled that the new board had refunded all of Brenda's improper fines, and she had gotten her $200 back with interest. That dinner turned into a regular thing. Mrs. Chen would invite me over every few weeks, and I would help her with household projects that required a younger back and knees. She became like a grandmother to me, and her family adopted me into their orbit. It was one of the unexpected good things that came out of the whole mess. By July, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was steady, the heat was oppressive but manageable, and the neighborhood was peaceful. My fence stood pristine and undamaged, a testament to the power of strategic planning and quality steel reinforcement. I would sometimes sit on my porch in the evening, drinking a beer, looking at that fence, and feeling deeply satisfied. One evening in August, Derek stopped by with his wife, Maria. We grilled burgers, sat in my backyard, and Derek asked if I had any regrets about the whole situation. I thought about it, really considered the question. The stress, the money, the confrontations, all of it had been draining. But in the end, I had stood up for myself, had refused to be pushed around, and had come out ahead. No regrets, I said. Well, maybe one. I wish I had installed the steel fence after the first time instead of waiting until the 7th. Derek laughed. Where is the story in that, though? This way you get to be the guy who outsmarted the HOA Karren with a fence. He was right. It was a good story, and I had earned it. The whole experience had taught me something important about standing your ground, about documentation and evidence, about community support. It had also taught me that people like Brenda, people who abuse whatever small power they have, usually end up facing consequences eventually. It just takes someone willing to push back. The neighborhood continued to improve under the new board. They organized a community garage sale in September that brought everyone together, started a neighborhood watch program that actually focused on safety rather than bylaw enforcement, and even negotiated a better contract for landscaping services that saved everyone money. It was what an HOA was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together for mutual benefit, not a petty fiefdom. I heard through Sandra, the lawyer, that Brenda had tried to get elected to her new HOA board in Scottsdale and had been rejected after someone did a background check and found the criminal record and civil judgments. Apparently, HOA drama follows you. I felt a twinge of something, not quite satisfaction, maybe just acknowledgement that actions have consequences. In October, the neighborhood held a Halloween party at the clubhouse. I brought chili, hung out with my neighbors, and watched kids run around in costumes. Thomas, the Marine on the HOA board, came up to me with a beer in hand and said, "You know, you changed this neighborhood. People are not harbors anymore. They know the board works for them, not the other way around. That is because you did not back down." I appreciated the sentiment, but I also knew I had just been defending my property. I had not set out to be some kind of neighborhood hero. I just wanted my fence to stop getting run over. Sometimes, though, standing up for yourself inspires others to do the same, and that ripple effect can change an entire community. By November, I had been living in Sycamore Heights for almost 2 years, and it finally felt like home. Not just the house, but the whole neighborhood. I knew my neighbors, had friends, had a community that looked out for each other. The divorce, the move, all the upheaval of starting over had led me here, and despite the Brenda and Greg situation, I was genuinely happy. Thanksgiving came, and Mrs. Chen invited me to join her extended family for dinner. I brought pumpkin pie and spent the day with 3 generations of the Chen family, eating incredible food and feeling grateful for unexpected blessings. They treated me like family, and in return, I helped her son fix his water heater the following week and refused to take payment. December brought cooler weather, which in Arizona means absolutely perfect temperatures. I spent weekends working on my house, adding small improvements, making it truly mine. I also started dating someone, a teacher named Grace Edwards who lived in the next neighborhood over. We met at a community event, hit it off over shared complaints about HOA stories, and had been seeing each other for about a month. Grace thought my fence story was hilarious. She had her own HOA nightmare from her previous house, something about unapproved Christmas lights, and we bonded over the absurdity of it all. She was smart, funny, and refreshingly normal after the chaos of the past year. We took things slow, but I could see potential there. On New Year's Eve, the neighborhood held a block party in the cul-de-sac. The same cul-de-sac where Greg had destroyed my fence 8 times. Folding tables were set up, food was spread out potluck style, and someone brought a karaoke machine. Kids ran around with glow sticks, adults mingled with drinks, and at midnight we counted down together and cheered. I stood there with Grace's hand in mine, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, and felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in years. My fence stood behind me, sturdy and undamaged, a silent guardian that had become a symbol of resilience. It was just wood pickets on the outside, but underneath was steel, strong and unyielding, kind of like me, I suppose. Life had knocked me down a few times, the divorce, the harassment, the stress, but I had reinforced myself, stood my ground, and come through stronger. January came, marking 2 years since Greg had first backed over my fence. The anniversary passed without incident, obviously, since the Pattersons were long gone. I took a moment that day to review the videos one last time, marveling at how much had changed. Then I deleted them from my active storage, kept backups just in case, and moved on. Work picked up in the new year, which was good for my bank account. I was getting referrals from satisfied customers, building a solid reputation. I hired an assistant, a young kid fresh out of trade school who reminded me of myself 20 years ago. Teaching him gave me purpose beyond just fixing air conditioners. Grace and I moved in together in March, into her house, which had more space and a better kitchen. I kept my house as a rental property, and coincidentally, a young couple with a newborn moved in. They were thrilled with the neighborhood, the new HOA, and they thought my fence was charming. I did not tell them the whole story, just said it was reinforced for durability. Some things are better left as neighborhood lore. The rental income added financial security, and with Grace sharing expenses, I was able to start saving seriously for the first time in years. We talked about the future, about maybe buying a bigger place together eventually, about building something lasting. It felt good to have plans that did not involve legal battles or fence repairs. In April, I ran into Officer Ramirez at a coffee shop. He remembered me immediately, asked how things were going. I told him everything had worked out, that the Pattersons were gone, that the neighborhood was thriving. He looked genuinely pleased, said it was nice when things actually resolved properly. We talked for a few minutes, and he mentioned that Brenda's arrest had actually triggered a review of several other complaints against her, and apparently there had been other incidents of abuse of authority. My case had opened a door that exposed a pattern. That conversation stayed with me. I had not realized the broader impact of standing up to Brenda. It was not just about my fence, it was about accountability, about not letting people with a little bit of power abuse it without consequences. Other people had suffered under her tyranny, and by pushing back, I had helped them too. May brought warm weather again, and Grace and I took a trip up to Flagstaff to escape the heat. We hiked, explored, talked about everything and nothing. She asked me once if I regretted how much energy I had put into the fence situation, if I wished I had just let it go. I thought about it seriously, then told her no. Some battles are worth fighting, not because you want conflict, but because backing down teaches bullies that their behavior works. Someone has to draw the line. Plus, I added with a grin, I got a really good fence out of it. She laughed, and we moved on to planning our next adventure. By summer, life had found a steady rhythm. Work, home, Grace, friends, hobbies, all the components of a well-balanced life. The fence drama had faded into background noise, a story I would tell at parties, a reminder that sometimes the little guy wins. My reinforced fence stood as physical proof that standing your ground, literally and figuratively, pays off. The HOA continued to function well. Alan stepped down from the board in June due to work commitments, and a young woman named Rebecca took his place. She brought fresh energy and ideas, organized community gardening plots, pushed for solar panel approval processes. The neighborhood continued to evolve in positive directions. I attended HOA meetings occasionally, mostly to stay informed, but also because I felt a responsibility to stay engaged. Apathy is what allowed people like Brenda to take over in the first place. An engaged community is a healthy community, and I wanted Sycamore Heights to stay healthy. In August, I got an unexpected call from Greg Patterson. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was subdued, tired. He apologized, a real apology, not the half-hearted ones from before. He said that getting away from Brenda, they had since divorced, had given him perspective on how toxic their relationship had been, how she had manipulated him into targeting me because I had not bowed to her authority. He took full responsibility for his actions, said he was in therapy, and hoped I could forgive him someday. I did not know what to say at first. Part of me was still angry, but mostly I just felt sad for him. He had been a tool for someone else's vendetta, and it had cost him thousands of dollars, a criminal record, and his marriage. I told him I appreciated the apology, that I hoped he found peace, and that I had moved on. We said goodbye, and I never heard from him again. That phone call gave me closure I did not know I needed. Greg was not a villain, just a weak man who had made bad choices. The real problem had been Brenda, and she was someone else's problem now. I felt the last little bit of resentment drain away, leaving only the satisfaction of having stood my ground and the gratitude for how things had turned out. Grace and I got engaged in September. Nothing fancy, just a quiet moment on a hike when she said she wanted to spend her life with me, and I realized I wanted the same thing. We started planning a small wedding for the following spring, just close friends and family. Mrs. Chen insisted on making dumplings for the reception, and I was not about to argue with her. As fall arrived and the weather turned perfect again, I found myself reflecting on the journey from that first broken fence to where I was now. 2 years, 8 fence incidents, 1 arrest, 1 lawsuit, and 1 really well-built fence had led to a complete transformation of my life and my neighborhood. It was not the path I would have chosen, but it was the one I had walked, and it had led somewhere good. My reinforced fence still stood perfect and white, a daily reminder that sometimes the best defense is being prepared, that documentation matters, that standing up to bullies works, and that community support can overcome individual tyranny. It was just a fence, but it represented so much more. I thought about all the people who had helped me along the way. Derek with his metalworking skills and loyal friendship, Mrs. Chen and the other neighbors who spoke up when it mattered, Sandra the lawyer who provided guidance at that crucial HOA meeting, Officer Ramirez and Jenkins who took my complaint seriously, Patricia Hammond who fought for me legally, the new HOA board who restored sanity to the neighborhood, and Grace who came into my life right when I was ready for something good. None of us do anything alone. I had stood my ground, but I had done it with support, with community, with people who believed in doing what was right. That was the real lesson of the whole fence saga. Individual courage matters, but collective action changes systems. The wedding took place in April, in Mrs. Chen's beautifully landscaped backyard with about 50 people in attendance. Derek was my best man and Grace's sister was her maid of honor. We said our vows under an arch that Derek had built and I had helped install, another collaboration that produced something strong and lasting. The dumplings were incredible and everyone agreed it was the best wedding food they had ever had. We honeymooned in San Diego, spent a week on the beach not thinking about work or responsibilities. When we got back, we started house hunting for a place that would be ours together, not mine or hers, but ours. We wanted more space, maybe room for kids eventually, and we wanted to stay in Gilbert, in Sycamore Heights if possible. Ironically, a house came up for sale 2 streets over from my rental property. 4 bedrooms, big backyard, completely remodeled, and best of all, it had a beautiful fence that was entirely decorative with no history of vehicular assault. We put in an offer, got accepted, and moved in by June. I sold Grace's old house, kept my original place as a rental, and we started building our life in our new home. The neighborhood welcomed Grace warmly, and she fit right in. She started helping with community events, joined the book club that met monthly at the clubhouse, and became friends with many of the same people who had supported me through the fence wars. Our house became a gathering place for barbecues and game nights, and I loved having people over, loved being part of a community that actually felt like a community. My original house, the one with the legendary fence, continued to be a great rental property. The young couple who lived there took excellent care of it, and they got a kick out of the fence story once I finally told them. The husband, whose name was James, was a mechanic and appreciated the engineering that had gone into the reinforcement. He would sometimes bring people by to show them, and I would get texts with photos of friends posing with the fence. It had become a minor tourist attraction in its own right. Years passed and life continued to be good. Grace and I had our first child, a daughter we named Allison, in the spring of my 4th year in Sycamore Heights. Mrs. Chen became an honorary grandmother, showering Allison with attention and homemade baby clothes. The neighborhood rallied around us, bringing meals and gifts and support. I watched my daughter grow up in a neighborhood that was safe, friendly, and well-managed. The HOA continued to function properly, with regular elections, transparent finances, and reasonable leadership. The lessons of the Brenda era had not been forgotten, and the community remained vigilant against any concentration of power or abuse of authority. Sometimes, pushing Allison in her stroller past my old house, I would look at that fence and marvel at how one relatively small act of standing my ground had rippled out to create lasting positive change. The fence was just a fence, but what it represented, the refusal to be bullied, the importance of evidence and documentation, the power of community support, those lessons had shaped not just my life but the entire neighborhood's culture. Derek's metalwork shop expanded, and he hired more people. He would joke that my fence had been his best advertisement, that people saw what quality reinforcement could do and wanted his services. He was being modest, his work spoke for itself, but I appreciated the connection. Grace thrived in her teaching career, and her school was only about 15 minutes from home. We had found a balance, work and family, community involvement and private life, planning for the future while appreciating the present. It was everything I had hoped for when I first moved to Sycamore Heights, and more than I could have imagined during those dark days when Greg was destroying my fence repeatedly. On the 5th anniversary of that 8th and final fence incident, I stood in my old front yard with permission from my tenants, just looking at the fence. It was still perfect, still strong, still doing its job. Grace came up beside me with Allison on her hip, and my daughter reached out to touch the white pickets, having no idea that she was touching a legendary piece of neighborhood history. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked. "Just how sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes," I said. "If Greg had never backed over my fence, if Brenda had never harassed me, we might never have met. The neighborhood might still be under her thumb. A lot of good came from something that felt terrible at the time." Grace leaned her head on my shoulder. "I am glad you did not back down." "Me too," I said, "me too." We walked back to our house, our real home, the one we had chosen together. But I would always have a connection to that first house, to that fence. To the stand I took when backing down would have been easier. It had shaped me, challenged me, and ultimately made me stronger. The steel reinforcement in that fence was a physical manifestation of the steel I had found in myself, the determination to not be pushed around, the courage to stand firm even when it was difficult. Life moved forward, as it always does. Allison grew, work continued, the neighborhood evolved, and new challenges arose and were met. But through it all, that fence stood as a reminder and a testament. It had stopped a truck cold when attacked, and metaphorically, it had stopped a bully's reign of terror. It was just wood and steel and paint, but it meant so much more. And every time I drove through Sycamore Heights, past that cul-de-sac, past that fence, I felt a quiet pride. Not in being vindictive or winning some petty battle, but in standing up for what was right, in refusing to be victimized, in being part of a community that came together when it mattered. That fence had become a symbol for the whole neighborhood, a reminder that ordinary people standing their ground together can overcome bullies and create something better. The 8th time Greg Patterson backed into my fence, he hit reinforced steel. And that made all the difference.